Hi, I'm Brett Carleton from the offices here at Heritage Wealth Management. I want to take just a couple minutes today to talk about just the global geopolitical environment as well as just what's going on here in the U.S. economy. Before I start, though, I want to say I'm not going to focus on the atrocities going on in the Middle East and the Russia-Ukraine war, but just more on how that impacts us. So trying to set all of that news aside. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to take us back to 1970s. Let's go back 50 years. And I'm actually going to read a punch list of I was thinking these were the economic highlights, but more like the economic lowlights of the 70s. So if we think back to the 1970s, we had record inflation, high budget deficits, high debt levels. The Federal Reserve was raising interest rates. Ultimately, they got to 21%, but that's a whole nother story. We had double-digit unemployment, a slowing economy, the Vietnam War withdrawal. We moved off the gold standard, which really exacerbated inflation. And if you have questions on that, we can talk about that a little bit more. But we basically went to free-floating currencies like we have today. And then just to throw it in for something on top of all this, we had the Iranian hostage crisis later on in the 1970s. But I want to focus back to October 1973, so 50 years ago. And those of you that were born before 1970 will remember this, but if you were born after that, you may not be fully aware of all this, or we may have forgotten all this. But in October of 1973, there was an invasion of Israel by Egypt and Syria, backed by the Soviet Union. The vice president resigned because of tax evasion issues. OPEC oil embargo due to our support of Israel. The U.S. military was placed on heightened alert because of nuclear threats due to the Soviet Union. Then President Nixon ordered his attorney general to fire Watergate special prosecutor, which set off a constitutional crisis like we hadn't seen in this country since the Civil War. And that took 10 months to resolve. So that wasn't something that was resolved immediately. And I remember growing up with the Watergate hearings on TV. I want to just say, does this sound a bit familiar to 2023? It's just amazing how history, as they say, echoes, doesn't necessarily repeat per se, but it echoes. We've been through very similar things like this before. I will do another video talking about if we just look at the stock market in 1972 and we compound that for 50 years, what that looks like, having just discussed everything I have just mentioned here. But we've got to understand history. We have been through similar things like this before. The other thing is in today's 24/7 news cycle, even if there's not a true crisis, it appears that we're in crisis. But really, when you look back through history, we're oftentimes in crisis more often than not in crisis. And that's why we put together a plan, and we must have a plan because we account for events like this. We want to make sure that we have adequate cash reserves to get us through these periods of time of market volatility, whether it be in equities or with interest rates with bonds. We also want to make sure that we have an appropriate level of equities because we don't want to have everything in stocks and have the market down 30 or 40% when we need cash for income or those unexpected events that pop up during lifetime. The other thing that I wanted just to touch on today, though, is we've been through things like this, but it's not just the stock market that we invest in. We invest in the underlying individual companies in these markets, the greatest companies in the world. And I'll give you an example. Coca-Cola just came out with their earnings announcement this morning, and they beat expectations because they're selling more Coke products than all the other products they sell. That's who we're investing in, is people that go to work for companies that work 24/7, in many cases 365 days a year to grow their businesses in spite of what's happening in the global economy. So why would we throw out the Coca-Colas, the Walmarts, the Apples in our portfolios because of geopolitical uncertainties? That's why it all comes back to planning. We plan for events like this so that we can get through times like this because crisis is the new norm. Especially with the media interaction that we have. So I wanted just to finish this up with Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's longtime partner. He made a comment, the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it. So we don't want to destroy our plan by throwing it out the window because of something that's going on geopolitically. So I would love to discuss any of these events more with you, but if you have any questions, please reach out to us, and thank you for your time today.